Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we drift into the soft shadows of a story that might be the most unsettling bedtime tale you'll ever hear. Imagine this. Moonlight glints on the surface of a river, the reeds rustle faintly, and somewhere out there, unseen, a prisoner's fate is being sealed with bowls of milk and honey. You don't need to shiver yet, though you might want to pull the blanket just a little higher. Because what begins with sweetness, milk smooth on your tongue, honey sticky on your lips, slowly, inexorably, turns into something that gnaws, festers, and crawls. This is Scaphism, the punishment that pretends to pamper while plotting a death so elaborate it feels like a riddle whispered by cruelty itself. And yes, you probably won't survive this one if you imagine it too vividly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is by your bedside. I always love picturing this strange little community spread across the globe, half asleep but still curious. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by standing on the banks of that slow-moving river, feeling the warm summer air pressing on your skin. Someone nearby stirs a pot of milk, thick and slightly sour from the sun. Another dips a wooden spoon into a jar of honey, golden and glistening, heavy like syrup. These are not gifts prepared for your table, not delicacies meant to fill your belly after a day of labour. They are ingredients of a ritual, and unfortunately you're not the guest, you're the offering. Imagine a wooden structure, hollowed out roughly in the shape of a man, like two canoes that could be joined together to cradle a body. You're guided toward it, and the smell of resin and fresh-cut wood mingles with the cloying sweetness of honey. Already you feel the irony. The same foods that ancient Greeks praised as gifts from the gods, that Persians offered in temples, are about to coat your body in a glaze that makes you less human, more feast. Milk and honey have long been symbolic. They show up in sacred texts promising a land of abundance. They shine in myths as the purest nourishment. Historians note that Persian courts considered honey not only a delicacy but a medicine, a preservative of flesh, which is almost comical here, because the last thing you want is your flesh preserved. But that's the twist. You're about to be preserved, all right, just not in the way you'd wish. The attendants, whether soldiers, executioners, or perhaps unwilling servants, press the first bowl to your lips. You sip the milk, creamy and slightly spoiled, and it fills your stomach with a thickness that doesn't quite settle. They feed you more than you want, spoon after spoon, until your belly protests. Then comes the honey, dripped along your tongue, rubbed across your face. At first it tastes like dessert after an unsteady meal, but it soon becomes overwhelming, like drowning in sweetness. One fringe tidbit claims that honey was sometimes used in ancient beauty rituals, mixed into skin salves, brushed into hair as a gloss. Tonight, it is smeared not for your beauty, but for your doom. Your arms are slid into the wooden halves, your torso settled into the hollow space. They pin your legs, strap your wrists. The wood is heavy, rough against your skin, smelling of sap and sun. As they close the two halves around you, leaving your head, arms and legs protruding, you understand you're no longer entirely a person. You've become part of an apparatus, a strange hybrid of man and coffin. The Persians had a talent for spectacle, for punishments that didn't just kill but displayed the majesty of law through sheer horror. Historians still argue whether this entire ritual was real or invented as propaganda. Was it a punishment used once and exaggerated endlessly, or a gruesome legend stitched together to frighten? It hardly matters to you here in this narration. The milk gurgles uneasily in your belly, the honey glistens on your chest and arms, and the insects are already curious. A fly lands near your ear. Another dips on your sticky forearm. You twitch, but the bindings hold you firm. The sweetness was never a kindness. It was bait, pure and simple. Think of how insects smell sugar across distances. Bees trace nectar. Ants follow invisible trails. Flies dart at the faintest aroma. You've become the brightest signal in the marsh, a buzzing invitation. And it doesn't take long. Soon, the air stirs heavier with wings. You hear the first mosquito whine, that needle-thin sound that always seems louder in the night. Then the tickle on your cheek, the sting at your ankle. You wince, try to shake it off, but the wood holds you fast. Someone laughs lightly on the bank, maybe a soldier sent to watch. For them, this is justice in motion. For you, it's the first tremor of realization. You're going to be here not for hours, but days, maybe longer. You've heard of crucifixion dragging on for a week if a body clung stubbornly to life. This too will be a long affair. By now, the milk and honey slosh inside you like a churning sea. Ancient records insist that victims were fed until their bowels loosened, because that waste would draw yet more creatures. You feel your stomach cramp, your skin flush. You remember how sweet milk turns when left in the sun, sour, curdled, buzzing with invisible life. And that's exactly what's brewing inside you. The river laps at the edges of your prison. The water is cool, almost kind. And yet you know it holds its own army of tormentors. Leeches that cling, mosquitoes that breed, gnats that cloud the air. This whole ecosystem is about to discover that you are their festival, their banquet. Nature itself becomes the executioner. You're not stabbed, not burned, not beheaded. You're digested alive by an environment that's been carefully prepared to see you not as a man, but as a resource. It's worth pausing to note, Scaphism comes to us mainly from Greek writers who despised Persia. They may have exaggerated, painting their rivals as more barbaric than they truly were. Herodotus, the great collector of tales, loved a shocking story. Historians still debate whether he recorded events faithfully or spun half of them for dramatic effect. So perhaps you're not even lying here in real history. Perhaps you're lying here in a myth created to warn of cruelty, like a nightmare written down to frighten children of the court. But when you're inside the story, you can't shrug it off. You can only taste the milk thick on your tongue, feel the honey tacky on your ribs, and listen to the drone of insects building around you. The sun climbs. You blink against the glare. Sweat beads under the glaze of honey, mingling with it, making your skin shine like caramelized sugar. It's almost funny. If you were at a fair, you'd call this candied fruit. Here, you are the fruit. You're the apple dipped in syrup, set out to glisten until someone takes a bite. And bites are coming, though not from anyone you'd welcome. You try to focus on anything else. Maybe you remember how honey has been found in Egyptian tombs, still edible after thousands of years. Maybe you let your mind wander to that fact, marvelling at how something so small can outlast empires. But then you feel the tickle of legs on your neck and the marvel fades. Honey may last forever, but you don't. The sweetness, once pleasant, is now nauseating. Your nose clogs with the smell, your mouth tastes only sugar. You crave salt, bread, anything plain. But that's not on offer. What's on offer is the slow conversion of sweetness into suffocation. You are the experiment, the proof that too much of a good thing becomes unbearable. A quirky tidbit. Some ancient physicians believed honey balanced the body's humours, cooling heat, soothing bile. You almost laugh. What balance do you feel now? There is no soothing here, only imbalance in every direction. Night promises no relief. The river cools, but the insects only grow bolder. Moths circle your face, gnats gather at your eyes. The moon drifts across the water, silvering the reeds, and you find yourself praying for sleep. But sleep comes thinly, if at all, because every moment brings another bite, another sting. You jerk awake from drowsiness at the sharp press of a mandible. You try to dream of something gentler, but even in dreams you're sticky, restrained, exposed. By dawn you realise the ritual isn't about speed, it's about spectacle. It's about sending a message to anyone watching. Betray us, and you too will be sweetened, set afloat, consumed piece by piece by the world itself. You're no longer being punished privately. You're transformed into a performance. The milk and honey weren't just tools, they were theatre props, chosen for their irony. And whether this story was ever carried out or only written down, the message survives centuries. The worst punishment is the one that turns abundance into agony. The river whispers on, the wood creaks under your weight, and the swarm thickens. The milk inside you sours further, gurgling uneasily, while the honey hardens into a glaze that cracks when you twitch. You're held between nourishment and rot, luxury and misery, sweetness and stench. You're the contradiction embodied, and this, unfortunately for you, is only the beginning. The sweetness has barely settled on your lips before the next stage begins, and it is far less poetic. You shift slightly, testing the planks that hem you in, and discover they are not just props in some passing ritual. They are your world now, Two heavy shells of timber carved to cradle you like a grotesque mould. The Persians were meticulous engineers. Their empire stretched across deserts, mountains and rivers, and they knew how to craft tools of trade, war and punishment alike. This wooden coffin, shaped like a pair of canoes split lengthwise, is one of their darker designs. The attendants slide the halves together, clamping you between them with no softness, no cushioning. Wood rasps against your skin, pressing on ribs, hips and thighs. The scent of sap and pitch is thick in your nose, a reminder that this material once lived as a tree, tall and unbroken, and now it has been cut, shaped and repurposed as your final container. You can see the sky only where your face juts through the oval opening. Your arms poke out like limbs of a marionette. Your legs stretched awkwardly, knees locked, ankles raw against rope. At first you wonder whether you could wriggle free. After all, the wood is not steel. Perhaps you could loosen it. You flex your arms, tug at your wrists, push against the bindings. Nothing budges. The Persians did not design this contraption for comfort or weakness. Every seam is reinforced. Every knot is double-tied. Even if you could snap a rope, the sheer weight of the timber would pin you still. You realise that this is not just a coffin, but a prison that denies every natural instinct. A historian might point out here that Persian execution methods varied widely. Sometimes they used stoning, sometimes impalement, sometimes burying alive. But Scaphism, if we believe the accounts, was reserved for traitors, for those whose betrayal demanded a punishment so unusual that it would echo beyond their death. The hollowed wood wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. You were no longer free to move as a man. You were reduced to cargo, freight strapped into a vessel. You weren't walking your own path anymore. You were being carried, ferried, displayed. And displayed you are. The guards step back to examine the work. You can't help noticing how their expressions are not entirely cruel. There is almost a craftsman's pride in their eyes. They don't need to shout to threaten. The wood itself is doing all the speaking. Its silence tells you that you're not going anywhere. It tells any onlookers that once placed inside, a traitor becomes an object, a story, a warning. There's a strange intimacy to being bound like this. The wood presses against your skin in ways no human touch would dare. Your shoulder blades are pinned, your spine forced into alignment, your hips wedged so tightly that every breath feels like a negotiation. You inhale shallowly, then exhale slower than usual, just to avoid the friction of ribs against timber. Already, your body learns the economy of effort. Don't move more than you must, because every movement rubs raw. But this wooden prison isn't complete until the honey is brushed across your face, arms and legs once again. It's sticky now, crusting at the edges where sun has baked it. The insects find you faster this time. A line of ants, quick and purposeful, has already discovered the sweetness smeared along your arm. They march in columns, disciplined and tireless. You watch them climb, pause, taste and signal the others. Soon you're less a prisoner than a buffet table. If you squint through the heat haze of the riverbank, you might notice how the reeds bend in the wind, how dragonflies dart above the water. Life continues all around, indifferent to your confinement. That indifference might be the cruelest detail. Empires rise and fall, kings command and conquer, but the wood and the insects, they just follow the laws of nature. To them, you're not a traitor or a rebel. You're just sugar, salt and meat left out in the open. You might wonder why the Persians chose wood rather than chains or cages. Wood has a deceptive softness. It creaks instead of clanking. It smells organic rather than metallic. Yet it holds as firmly as iron. In the old forests of Persia, cedars and firs grew tall, their trunks harvested for palaces and ships. To turn that same resource into an instrument of punishment is a kind of cosmic irony. The same material that builds temples can also build coffins, and because wood floats, it makes you mobile. You can be launched into a river, carried by current, paraded before villages downstream like a warning carried on water. Here's a quirky detail. Some scholars speculate that the word Scaphism derives from the Greek scaphi, meaning boat or trough. Imagine that. Your punishment is linguistically reduced to a household object, a hollow container. You're not a man anymore, you're a scoop of flesh fitted into a scoop of wood. And as the Greek storytellers retold the scene, they made sure to emphasize that irony. The hours pass, the sun shifts overhead, its beams slipping through the gaps in the wood to stripe your skin. You feel your body heating like bread inside an oven. Sweat seeps out, but instead of cooling you, it just mingles with honey, thickening it further. You realise the wood isn't just holding you. It's cooking you slowly, baking you alive. Not in flames, but in suffocation. Historians still argue whether anyone could truly survive long in such a prison. Wouldn't dehydration kill within days? Wouldn't shock overwhelm sooner? And yet, accounts claim victims lasted more than a week, sometimes longer. Perhaps the milk and honey offered enough sustenance to prolong the suffering. Perhaps the river beneath the boat cooled the body just enough to prevent collapse. Or perhaps the whole tale was exaggerated, a fable of endurance twisted for drama. But you don't get the luxury of scholarly distance. You're not in a classroom comparing footnotes. You're inside the coffin, feeling the wood swell slightly as moisture from the river seeps into its fibres. You're inside the prison where every breath scrapes your chest against bark, every twitch grates your skin against grain. At one point, a soldier drifts closer, pokes the wood with a staff, and mutters something under his breath. Maybe he's checking to see if you're still alive. Maybe he's joking to his companion. Maybe he's just bored. That's another humiliation. Your suffering is so drawn out it becomes tedious to others. What feels like eternity to you is just another assignment to him, like watching a kettle boil. Still, your mind clings to fragments of distraction. You remember that in ancient Persia, carpenters were highly respected, their skills recorded on clay tablets and praised in hymns. You wonder if one of them built this very structure, proud of its symmetry, never minding its purpose. Perhaps he thought of it as just another project, like a chair or a chest. The prison of hollowed wood may once have been someone's proudest craft. That thought almost makes you laugh. Almost. Night returns, and the wood grows colder. You shiver, not just from temperature, but from the claustrophobic awareness that you cannot roll onto your side, cannot curl up, cannot stretch. You are trapped in a posture so unnatural it becomes pain by itself. Muscles ache, joints throb, your neck stiffens. Sleep teases, but flees. You drift into shallow dozes, jolted awake each time by the itch of crawling legs or the pinch of teeth. The moon rises, silvering the river, and you catch your reflection in the water below. At first, you hardly recognise yourself. The honey has dried into a glaze, your hair clumps in sticky strands, your skin gleams like varnished wood. You look like a sculpture, not a man. Perhaps that's the point. Perhaps this punishment was designed to strip away humanity, to turn flesh into exhibit. And then, just before dawn, you hear the creak of ropes as the guards push your wooden shell closer to the water's edge. They grunt, heave, and slide you into the river. The cold shocks your skin where the wood touches water. Ripples spread outward, carrying you into the current. The river becomes your road, the prison your boat, and you your own cargo. It is then you realise the horror fully. The prison of hollowed wood is not just to bind you, not just to starve or to feed. It is to transport you into a wider stage. Villagers along the banks will see you float by, will whisper of your crime, will point and shudder. The wood makes you portable. It carries not just your body but the Empire's message. Betray us, and this is your fate, sealed, displayed, consumed in plain sight, and so you drift, sticky and aching, strapped into a vessel that floats but does not free. You're both prisoner and performance, both man and myth. The wood holds you, defines you, and denies you. It is your world, and it is merciless. The river has accepted you into its long arms, carrying your wooden coffin along its slow current. You thought, perhaps, the water would offer a mercy, a cooling embrace, a chance to numb the ache of your body. But you quickly learn the truth. This is no comfort. You're pinned between sun above and water below, helpless under the weight of sky itself. The sun rises with all the indifference of a monarch who has no need to acknowledge your existence. Its rays strike your face, your chest, your exposed arms. Honey softens, turns liquid again, trickles in sticky rivulets along your forearm and drips into the water below. Each drop is like an invitation to the creatures around you. You try to angle your head, to escape the beam, but there is no escape. You are fixed in place. The sky is enormous, endless, and its vastness amplifies your smallness. You're a speck, strapped to a piece of timber, floating beneath something so huge it makes your suffering almost laughable. Yet the irony stings. This punishment is not hidden. It is not carried out in some dark chamber underground. No, it is framed beneath the open heavens, under the most public dome of all. The sun, the moon, the stars. Every celestial witness is called to watch your humiliation. Insects respond first. The heat quickens their wings, their appetites. A fly lands on your cheek. Another hovers at the corner of your eye, darting closer until you blink furiously to drive it off. But your movements are jerky, limited. The flies return again and again, relentless. They don't understand your protests. They understand only sugar and sweat. Soon it's not just flies. Mosquitoes rise from the reeds, whining as they draw near. You can feel their probing legs brushing against your skin, then the sharp prick as they pierce flesh. You try to flinch, but flinching only exposes another patch of skin. Their bites itch immediately, but you can't scratch, can't rub, can't swat. Your body becomes a banquet, one sting at a time. The guards, watching you shift their weight, murmur to one another. To them this is routine. Maybe they've drawn lots to decide who will keep watch tonight. Maybe they joke that you'll soon be unrecognisable. One of them picks a blade of grass and chews it lazily, as though this entire spectacle is nothing more than a chore. To you, pinned beneath sky, every minute is eternal. To them, hours pass like water slipping by. The Persians were known for their grand constructions, Persepolis rising in columns of stone, roads stretching like veins across the empire, irrigation channels that turned desert into farmland. That same engineering brilliance is at work here, in miniature. The coffin keeps you floating, but immobile. The sun ensures your body bakes. The river ensures insects and fish have constant access. It is cruel, yes, but also systematic, almost scientific. Historians still argue whether the Persians truly refined this method, or whether Greek storytellers exaggerated it to paint their enemies as monstrous. Yet in your position, scholarly doubts don't ease the pain. Pinned as you are, you become hyper-aware of details. The buzzing around your ears is louder than drum beats. The honey on your skin is tackier than glue. The ropes binding your wrists chafe deeper with every twitch. Sweat stings your eyes, blurring the sky above into a molten blur. You squint, but the sun always finds you. Your thoughts wander because they must. You try to distract yourself with memory, with trivia, with anything but the itch of crawling things. You recall how in some cultures honey was a funeral offering sealed in jars to honour the dead. A small, almost comic part of you wonders if that tradition came from this punishment. Did anyone think to honour victims of Scaphism with a jar of honey beside them? Probably not. The honey already smeared on your chest is memorial enough. At midday the sun beats most fiercely. Your lips crack. The milk in your stomach curdles further, bloating you, making you groan with discomfort. You can feel your belly distend, heavy and unsettled. The very nourishment meant to prolong your life is turning inside you, fermenting. That detail, you recall dimly, was the purpose. The Persians, or at least the storytellers, wanted the victim to produce waste, to soil themselves, to create yet another lure for insects and vermin. And indeed you feel the shame rising. The prison gives you no dignity. Your body has its needs, and those needs are exploited. Waste seeps out, and instantly the air thickens with new scents. Flies gather in clouds, a black mist settling over you. They land where they please, probing, tasting, laying tiny eggs you cannot see. The sun bakes those eggs even as they are laid, warming them into life. The cycle of torment accelerates. Pinned as you are, you can only endure. Your jaw clenches, your fists curl, your eyes squeeze shut. But none of those gestures matter. The insects continue, the sun continues, the river continues. Time itself feels pinned with you, each minute dragged out, each hour stretched thin. At dusk, the sun lowers, but the sky offers no real relief. Instead of heat, you get dampness. The river exhales mist, cool on your skin, but the insects do not retreat. Night brings mosquitoes in greater swarms, their high-pitched whines circling you endlessly. Stars emerge, sharp and distant, but they give no comfort. The sky's wide, cold, indifferent. You're alone under it, pinned as surely as a butterfly on a collector's board. One curious detail surfaces in your mind, almost absurd. Ancient Persians believed in dualities, light and dark, good and evil, truth and lies. They saw the universe as a struggle between cosmic forces. Here you are, pinned beneath sun and sky, and you feel like the battlefield of those very forces. Light scorches you, darkness swarms you, truth fades into delirium, lies whisper that you might survive. By morning the sun rises again, and you almost laugh, if laughter were possible. The world repeats itself, the cycle continues. You're still pinned, still helpless, still beneath a sky too vast to care. You wonder how many more rotations of sun and moon you will witness, strapped to wood, eaten in pieces, turned into a living monument of pain. The Persians may have chosen this method precisely for that repetition. Not a quick blow, not a sudden shock, but an ordeal that stretched across days, across weather, across the whole rhythm of nature. You weren't simply killed, you were displayed as a lesson written in real time, every sunrise and sunset a chapter. And the lesson was clear. Power holds you down, and nature itself can be harnessed as an executioner. Pinned beneath sun and sky, you begin to understand the strange poetry of it. You're not just one man in wood. You're a stage on which insects perform, a canvas on which sun paints, a vessel in which river carries decay. You're no longer separate from nature. You are part of it, absorbed, consumed, reduced. And as the day stretches on, as the air thickens with heat, as the buzzing builds to a fever pitch, you realise something chilling. Pinned here, beneath sun and sky, you are both punishment and prophecy. The Empire is showing its people not only what happens to traitors, but what happens to anyone who thinks they stand apart from the natural order. The wood, the insects, the water, the fire of the sun, all of them are stronger than you. You're just another offering to the sky. The third dawn has scarcely burned away its mist when you feel it. More than a tickle now, more than a nuisance. It is the certainty of being eaten. The first days were teasing, only nips and pinpricks. But now your body has become a host, a landscape, a larder. The feast has begun in earnest, and the guests are numerous. It starts small, as so many horrors do. A fly lands on your ankle. You twitch, but you can't brush it away. Another lands, and then another, and soon your ankle is not skin, but a runway for wings. They cluster where the honey has congealed into sticky amber patches. Some flies dip their tiny mouths into the sweetness. Others are drawn lower, to the damp warmth of your waist. They don't discriminate. To them, you're a banquet with courses ranging from sugar to rot. The itch is maddening. You try to ignore it, to let your mind wander to the reeds whispering along the riverbank, to the sun dancing on ripples. But every second brings new movement on your skin. Legs crawling across hairs, proboscises piercing, mandibles scraping. They crawl into your ears, your nostrils, even attempt to sip at the corners of your eyes. You blink furiously, but they return. Your body is not your own anymore, is a commons, a shared meal for anything with wings or legs. Historians record that victims of Scaphism were consumed alive, not in one brutal swoop, but through the tiny, relentless labours of countless insects. Some scholars wonder whether larvae truly hatched within the flesh, burrowing as they grew. Others argue it was an exaggeration meant to horrify readers, but you don't get to debate. You only feel the evidence, the crawling, the biting, the soft tearing. Each sensation confirms that your body is no longer whole. There is a strange rhythm to it. The flies buzz, land, feed, and lift off in cycles, a pattern as regular as waves. You begin to anticipate them. The itch before the bite, the sting before the numbness. You brace, but it never helps. Each new bite is a fresh surprise, as though nature delights in keeping you off balance. And it isn't only flies. Ants march across your forearm in steady lines, undeterred by your shivers. They bite too, leaving tiny burning dots that multiply until your arm feels aflame. Wasps hover, curious, dipping to taste the honey streaked on your chest. Mosquitoes pierce your skin at random, each one drawing more blood than you think you can spare. You're like a keg tapped from every angle, your lifeblood sipped away in drops. The Persians, masters of theatre, must have known the spectacle would be more horrifying than a sword stroke. To see a man gradually transformed into carrion, to watch life peeled away by creatures so small they seem insignificant. That was a lesson carved in terror. And the guards watching you seem to know this. They lean against spears, exchanging words, occasionally chuckling at your twitching and grimacing. To them, it is a show. To you, it is eternity. The river offers no reprieve. Leeches find their way through gaps in the wood, latching onto toes and calves. Their mouths are silent but efficient, swelling with your blood. You don't even feel the bite at first. Only later do you notice the throbbing, the slippery movement as they detach and drift back into the water. Fish brush against your feet, curious. You realise the entire ecosystem has taken notice of you. You're no longer a man, but a node in the food chain, a resource. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind as if summoned by irony. In some ancient cultures, honey was used to preserve bodies, coating corpses to slow decay. Alexander the Great's body, legend claims, was preserved in honey after his death. Yet here, honey does the opposite. It accelerates your decay, turning you into food rather than saving you from it. The contrast is almost darkly comedic. The same golden substance that kept a king intact is feeding flies from your flesh. Your senses warp. Every sound amplifies. The hum of wings feels like thunder. The scrape of mandibles is louder than whispers. The itch of crawling becomes unbearable, and yet you can't scratch, can't move, can't defend. You're reminded of sleepless nights when a single mosquito ruined your rest. Now imagine not one mosquito, but hundreds, then thousands. It is a symphony of torment, and you're both instrument and audience. As hours stretch, you begin to lose track of where your body ends and the insects begin. Their movements become constant, almost blending into one vibrating sensation. Occasionally, a sharper sting jolts you. Wasp, hornet, or perhaps a beetle with stronger jaws. You grit your teeth, but the noise escapes anyway, a strangled cry that earns a glance from the guards. One smirks, the other spits into the river. Somewhere in the haze you wonder if this was worse for famous victims like Mithridates, whose story Greek writers loved to tell. Was his suffering embellished to frighten audiences, or was it as relentless as yours? Historians still argue whether the accounts of worms breeding in his flesh were real or rhetorical. But you don't need historians. You need only look at your own arm, swollen and spotted, to know that whether the worms hatch or not, you are being eaten alive. The sun dips again, casting long shadows, and the sky glows pink and gold. Beauty persists in the world, indifferent to you. You almost laugh at the cruelty of it. How can the horizon look so serene while your body is being devoured one bite at a time? That is the true indifference of nature. It creates sunsets and swarms in the same breath. Night magnifies the ordeal. By day you could at least see the creatures, anticipate their movements. By night you feel only the pricks and scrapes in the dark. Mosquitoes swarm thicker in the cool air. Moths batter against your face. Spiders descend on silken threads, using you as anchorage. Every rustle in the reeds sounds like another invasion. Your imagination fills gaps the darkness leaves. Pinned, coated, consumed, you realise you are less a prisoner than a feast laid out on a grand platter. The wooden coffin is the dish, the milk and honey the garnish, the insects the eager guests. You, unfortunately, are the main course. The feast is endless. It does not pause for night or day, for weather or whim. Crawling, biting, sipping, laying, the cycle continues. You are no longer an individual. You are sustenance. You are soil. You are a story unravelling slowly, bite by bite. And yet, beneath the despair, a strange clarity forms. You understand the punishment's genius. It doesn't just end life, it erodes identity. It makes you realise you're not above the natural world, but thoroughly at its mercy. You are not king, not soldier, not citizen. You are food, no different from fallen fruit, no better than a carcass left for scavengers. The crawling things remind you of this truth with every sting. The Persians wanted that lesson remembered. And whether Scaphism was historical fact or moral fable, the lesson survives. You've become the feast for crawling things, and crawling things always finish what they start. By the time the next sunrise burns through the mist, you have stopped thinking of yourself as merely bitten or stung. You're ripening. What was once a body defined by strength and will has softened, swollen, and seeped. The feast of insects hasn't ended. It has entered a new stage. Now you're not simply alive within the wood, you're decaying within it. And decay has its own presence, almost like a companion that refuses to leave your side. The smell announces it before you even notice the rest. At first, it was only honey's cloying sweetness mixed with sour milk. But now another odour pushes through, sharp and unmistakable. Rot. It rises from your skin, from the waste your body can no longer hide, from the wounds that fester where insects have feasted too long. The stench settles around you like a second coffin, invisible but heavy. You try to turn your head away from it, but there is no away. You carry the smell, you exhale it. Flies adore it. They come in thicker clouds, not merely sipping at sugar but plunging into the folds where flesh has softened. Their tiny bodies vibrate with excitement, wings drumming louder as they gather. They land and lay, hundreds of eggs scattered like pearls on damp earth. You can't see them, but you feel them, sticky, gritty, clustering in moist corners of your body. And then, hours later, you feel more. The eggs hatch. Larvae begin to move, writhing blindly, seeking nourishment. They burrow where the skin yields. The sensation is not pain exactly, it is worse. It is the knowledge that you are alive while your body is repurposed from the inside out. Historians who retold Scaphism leaned into this detail. Some claimed the victim's body became a nest, crawling with worms that grew fat on human tissue. Skeptics argue this was exaggeration, that no body could endure such violation for long. But whether myth or fact, your own skin insists on the truth. You're not alone inside yourself anymore. You host things, and they multiply. The river adds its contribution. Water laps through cracks in the wooden shell, dampening your lower body. That dampness mingles with waste, creating a slurry that clings to you. Leeches return, drawn to the dark warmth. You feel them latch on. Their suckers steady and patient. Fish nibble at toes, small nips that sting but also confirm you're dissolving into the river's menu. Even as you float, you're slowly being absorbed. You once thought death was a moment, one breath cut short, one strike ending all. But Scaphism rewrites that idea. Death is not a single act here. It is a process, drawn out into days, teased like a cruel storyteller who refuses to reach the ending. You're half alive, half corpse, existing in a liminal space where both states coexist. Rot becomes your companion, and you cannot dismiss it. The sun rises higher, baking the dampness into a crust. Honey, sweat, waste, and decay fuse into a single coating on your skin, stiff in places, slimy in others. Your nose fills with it until you can taste rot on your tongue. Every shallow breath carries the flavour deeper. You gag, but even the act of gagging seems futile. There is nothing to expel. You're already expelling yourself in pieces and fluids in cells that slough away without notice. You think of burial customs and the irony twists deeper. Persians buried their dead carefully, often raising them on stone platforms so scavenging birds could purify the remains. Zoroastrian belief held that corpses polluted the earth if buried. Yet here you are, polluted while still alive, given to insects, fish and birds before death has claimed you. The cosmic order of purity and corruption is mocked by your state. Historians still argue whether Scaphism was consistent with Zoroastrian ritual, or whether it was a grotesque invention of Greek enemies. Either way, you embody the contradiction. Unburied, unclean, uncared for. By afternoon, delirium creeps in. Fever grips you. The sun drills into your skull and your mind drifts. You hallucinate conversations with the crawling things. A fly whispers advice. A maggot reassures you that you will not be wasted. The leech pulsing at your calf hums like a drum, and you almost find rhythm in its suction. Rot, in its strange intimacy, feels like company. You realise this is how loneliness is conquered. Not by friends or family, but by the certainty that something always shares your body. It is grotesque comfort. In a clearer moment you recall fringe tales of honey being used as embalming paste in distant lands. Some even spoke of a legendary preparation called mellified man, a body preserved entirely in honey, then aged until it became a strange medicinal candy. The thought makes you shudder and laugh all at once. You're becoming mellified in reverse, sweetened and rotting simultaneously, turned into both food and medicine for insects. A quirky tidbit, and yet not amusing at all when you are the subject. The guards keep their distance now. The smell drives them back. They still watch, but from farther along the bank. They cover their noses with cloths, muttering about endurance, about justice, about the Empire's will. Their words are muffled by the swarm of flies, the endless drone that seems to echo even inside your skull. You realise your suffering is too much even for those assigned to witness it. And in that realisation, another layer of humiliation. You're both spectacle and repulsion. Evening falls. The sun withdraws, but rot remains. It grows stronger in the cool air, sharper, unmistakable. You smell yourself before you feel yourself. You wonder if this is what animals scent when they circle a carcass in the wild. You are becoming carrion, broadcasting signals that predators know instinctively. Somewhere in the distance you hear a jackal yelp. Perhaps it has caught your scent. You hope the wood will hold it back if it comes closer. You're not sure whether to dread or welcome such an ending. Through the night you listen to the rustle of creatures, the constant hum of flies, the ripple of the river. The sky glitters with stars, but you barely notice. The world above feels irrelevant. Your world is within wood and swarm, a closed circuit of flesh and rot. You whisper in your head to the decay itself. You are my only companion now, and in your fevered state the rot whispers back. By dawn, you're not entirely sure where you end and it begins. Your skin is blotched and soft, your breath rattles. You are not dying in an instant, you're dying by companionship. Rot sits beside you, leans against you, crawls across you. It does not leave, it does not abandon. It is loyal in a way humans never are. And so you float, a prisoner of both wood and decay, carried along the river like a grotesque offering. You have entered the stage where rot is no longer an intruder. It is part of you, and in some twisted way you accept it. The river carries you still, but the focus of your fading mind begins to widen. Beyond the crawling things, beyond the suffocating rot, you can almost hear the distant voices of the court. The empire that conceived this punishment, the Achaemenid dynasty that once ruled over vast lands stretching from the Aegean to the Indus. Your torment is not happening in a void. It is happening in the shadow of kings who shaped history, kings who built roads across deserts, kings who bent nations to their will. You imagine the palace at Persepolis, its columns rising like forests of stone, carved with reliefs of emissaries from every corner of the empire bringing tribute. Gold bowls, embroidered cloth, exotic animals, all carried on the backs of men who feared and revered the great king. Somewhere within those halls decisions were made, justice was pronounced, and punishments devised to match the weight of betrayal. The echo of the court is in your ears now, as if each buzzing fly were a whisper of Persian officials discussing your fate. The Achaemenid court was a place of paradox. On one hand, it was known for tolerance. Cyrus the Great issued proclamations respecting the customs and religions of conquered peoples. On the other hand, treachery against the throne was answered with punishments designed to terrify. Scaphism, whether myth or reality, reflects that contradiction. You can almost see the courtiers leaning forward, nodding gravely, as a sentence is passed not merely to kill, but to instruct. The king's justice was not satisfied with silence. It demanded spectacle. Historians record that Mithridates, an officer accused of betraying King Artaxerxes II, was the most famous victim of Scaphism. Greek sources gleefully describe how he lasted 17 days afloat, a living warning against treachery. Was that duration possible? Scholars still argue, pointing out how swiftly dehydration usually claims a body. Perhaps the account was stretched like a tale told at a banquet, made grander with every retelling. Still, the name clings to history like your body clings to life, proving the power of narrative in shaping memory. You try to imagine the trial itself. Was Mithridates dragged before the throne, chains clinking against marble floors? Did the courtiers whisper behind their hands, eyes bright with anticipation of what punishment would come, or was the decision quiet, perfunctory, as if such cruelty had already become routine? In your fevered haze you hear the king's voice, resonant and commanding, declaring that betrayal deserves more than death. It deserves dissolution into nature itself. The echoes grow sharper in your imagination. You picture courtiers in the elaborate robes, their hems embroidered with golden lions. You see the feathered fans waving slowly in the summer air. You hear the scribes scratching reeds against parchment, recording decrees that would be preserved for centuries. The contrast to your state could not be greater. They feasted on roasted lamb, drank wine sweetened with pomegranate, debated philosophy under shaded colonnades. You float in filth, stripped of dignity, served up to insects instead of to gods. Yet both realities belong to the same empire. There is a curious fact that drifts into your thoughts. The Achaemenid kings were obsessed with order, with arta, the concept of truth and cosmic justice. Their kingship was meant to mirror divine order on earth. But what truth lies in your condition? Is it justice, or is it chaos disguised as law? Historians still debate whether punishments like Scaphism were consistent with Persian ideals, or whether Greek chroniclers exaggerated them to smear their rivals. To you, pinned and decaying, it hardly matters. Justice has been twisted into theatre, and you are the actor who cannot leave the stage. The court's grandeur feels like a taunt. You think of Darius the Great commissioning canals, Xerxes marching armies across pontoon bridges, Artaxerxes ordering gardens where peacocks strutted among lilies. All the resources of empire, and here they are turned toward making sure one man suffers not for minutes, but for days. The same ambition that carved roads across continents carved this wooden coffin for your body. You wonder if courtiers gossiped about punishments the way modern people gossip about scandals. Perhaps one leaned to another and said, "Did you hear? They're giving him the boats." Perhaps laughter rippled across the hall, cruel and satisfied. Or perhaps silence fell, heavy with dread, as each man realised he too could be strapped between planks should his loyalty falter. That silence would have been the real power of the punishment. Not the death of one man, but the fear it sowed in thousands. A quirky tidbit surfaces. At Persian banquets, honey was sometimes drizzled over roasted meats as a delicacy. Imagine that. The same honey gracing golden plates for nobles is now smeared across your skin, not to delight taste buds, but to lure flies. What is luxury in one setting becomes torment in another. Empires love their ironies. The echoes of the court blend with the river's gurgle, with the buzzing swarm, with the ache of your body. You imagine that somewhere a scribe is recording your fate, stylizing it for posterity. Perhaps he inflates the numbers of days you endure, turning your misery into a legend of loyalty and treachery. Perhaps he will leave out your delirious whispers, your silent tears, your hope that death would come sooner. History has a way of preserving spectacle and discarding humanity. You fear you will be remembered not as a man, but as a cautionary tale, and yet, lying there in the wood, you realise that in some twisted way you are connected to that court. Every sting, every bite, every indignity is an extension of the king's will. You are tethered to the throne even as you float downstream. You are a living decree, an echo of the Achaemenid court drifting through river reeds. Even as night falls again and you stare at the stars, half blind with fever, you can't help but picture the palace lights flickering hundreds of miles away. Gold bowls clink, musicians play, servants pour wine. The court thrives, the empire endures, and you, one rotting man in a wooden coffin, are part of its grandeur, a dark reflection of its power. And so the echoes of the court linger. They hover in the buzzing of flies, they shine in the burning sun, they whisper through the reeds at night. Your punishment is not merely your own, it is an extension of empire. Long after you are gone, those echoes will remain, just as they echo still in history books, in whispered stories, in the minds of sleepless listeners tonight. The wood creaks beneath you as the river nudges it gently against reeds, and in that endless suspension between agony and waiting, your mind drifts far beyond the insects and the sun. You begin to think about stories, about the people who told them, and about whether what you are enduring is even what they said it was. Because while your flesh insists this is real, historians in centuries to come will sit in cool libraries and argue whether this punishment ever truly happened. You can almost picture them, bearded scholars of the Renaissance, Victorian gentlemen in musty studies, modern professors clicking through slides in air-conditioned lecture halls, all debating your suffering as if it were a chess problem. Was Scaphism an invention of the Greeks to smear their Persian rivals? Was it a metaphor, a grotesque allegory meant to dramatise treachery? Or was it practised only once, so sensational that it became immortal in text? The most cited account comes from Plutarch, a Greek historian writing centuries after the Achaemenids. He describes Mithridates, the soldier condemned by Artaxerxes II, floating between boats and being consumed over days by insects and rot. His narrative is detailed, too detailed for some, leading skeptics to say he embroidered the tale for effect. After all, Greek writers had a fondness for presenting Persians as decadent, cruel, and unrestrained. They painted them as the other, barbaric in contrast to Greek ideals of moderation. And what better way to reinforce that stereotype than with a punishment so elaborate, it sounds more like theatre than reality. Yet others argue the Greeks did not need to invent such a method. They might have only reported what they heard, embellishing as storytellers do. After all, Persians were known to employ unusual punishments: flaying, impalement, burying alive. Scaphism, then, may not have been beyond imagination. It may simply have been the rarest, reserved for those whose betrayal demanded a performance rather than an execution. You shift within the coffin as much as the ropes allow and think, does it matter to you whether later scholars believe? Your pain is not theoretical. Your sores are not metaphors. The insects crawling inside your wounds are not allegorical devices, yet there is an odd comfort in realizing that people, centuries hence, will argue about you, weigh footnotes about you, debate the texture of your suffering. In some strange way, your agony ensures you will not be forgotten. Historians still argue whether Mithridates' 17-day ordeal is possible. 17 days? Imagine that. The body without water usually collapses within 4 or 5. But Plutarch claimed he was fed daily with milk and honey to prolong the horror. Could the nutrients in the liquid really have stretched life that far? Some suggest exaggeration, others suggest mistranslation. Perhaps days were miscounted. Perhaps the tale grew longer each time it was retold. Still, the number persists in texts, etched into the collective imagination. There are fringe theories too, whispered at the edges of scholarship. Some writers claim Scaphism was never meant literally, that it was symbolic of how betrayal erodes a man from within, how guilt consumes flesh like insects. Others argue it was a deliberate slander crafted by Greek chroniclers during the long wars with Persia to paint their enemies as monstrous tyrants. After all, history is written by those who survive, and the Greeks had much to gain from depicting Persians as cruel. You feel the irony. Your reality may be someone else's metaphor. Your suffering may be dismissed as propaganda in some seminar centuries later. A professor might wave a hand and say, of course, Scaphism is a likely exaggeration, never actually practiced. Meanwhile, here you are, chewed and fevered, living proof that exaggeration and experience sometimes overlap. Your delirious mind even imagines a conversation with one of those scholars. You call out to him, voice hoarse, "Do you believe me now?" He adjusts his glasses, frowns at his notes and replies, "The sources are inconclusive." You laugh bitterly, though it comes out as a cracked wheeze. To him, you are footnotes. To you, he is centuries too late. The debate extends beyond Greeks and Persians. Later cultures retold the story too. Roman writers, medieval chroniclers, Renaissance collectors of curiosities. Each time details shifted. Some said victims were smeared with honey, others said only their faces were exposed. Some described the boats as elegant constructions, others pictured rough-hewn planks. Variations crept in, as with any legend retold across generations, but the core remained the same: a man sealed in wood, consumed by insects and time. And so the question lingers: does repetition create truth? If 100 voices across centuries say Scaphism happened, does that make it real? Or is it only myth layered so thick it feels like fact? Historians still argue, and perhaps they always will. But to the listener lying in bed now, in a safe century, it hardly matters. The story itself is enough to haunt, whether born of reality or invention. Even in your fevered haze, you understand that truth and story are not enemies. They often march hand in hand, one exaggerating the other, one disguising the other. Perhaps your ordeal is literal, perhaps it is partly symbolic. Either way, it carries a lesson about power, about cruelty, about how societies remember their enemies. And so, as night creeps across the river again, you lie pinned in your wooden shell, feeling yourself both victim and legend. Your flesh is real, your pain undeniable, but your story has already escaped into scrolls, into debates, into whispers in classrooms centuries away. The crawling things eat at your body, the historians will pick at your memory. Both are feasts, and neither will end quickly. By the time your swollen body drifts into yet another blistering afternoon, you begin to understand something chilling. This punishment is not just about you. It is not only your betrayal, your pain, your decay. It is theatre, a parable staged by those who sit on thrones and wield power like a blade with two edges, one of mercy, the other of cruelty. And they have chosen to turn the cruel edge outward, to let the world see how sharp it can cut. In an empire as sprawling as the Achaemenids, with its dozens of peoples and languages, maintaining loyalty was no easy task. Roads stretched across deserts and mountains, governors ruled provinces far from the capital, soldiers garrisoned lands they barely knew. A king could not be everywhere at once, so he needed stories to travel where his gaze could not. Punishments like Scaphism were not only executions, they were messages. You floating in your honey-glazed coffin are a living decree sent downstream. Defy the king, and you will not only die, you will be erased, humiliated, and consumed in public view. The cruelty of Scaphism is that it is slow enough to be witnessed. Ordinary execution, a sword, a rope, a spear, ends too quickly to teach. But days of torment, that creates conversation. People talk about what they saw, what they smelled, what they could hardly bear to look at. And as those stories ripple outward, they do the king's work for him. Your agony becomes the empire's propaganda. Historians point out that ancient punishments were rarely only about the victim. Crucifixion in Rome wasn't simply death. It was a billboard of obedience. Impalement in Assyria wasn't simply punishment. It was deterrence on a stake. Scaphism belongs in this lineage. Cruelty elevated into spectacle, pain converted into parable. And the parable is simple. Power can caress with honey, and power can weaponize that same honey into horror. You feel the cruel edge with every bite, every sting, every drop of sweat. The king could have ended you in an instant. He could have drawn a blade, ordered an archer, commanded a single swift blow. Instead, he chose the edge that cuts not your neck, but your dignity, your humanity, your very identity. You're not killed, you're undone. A memory drifts into your mind, perhaps fabricated by fever, perhaps real. You recall a proverb spoken in a market once. A king's mercy is sweeter than honey. You almost laugh at the irony. Here, the king's cruelty is coated in honey, a parody of mercy. What should have been nourishment becomes bait. What should have been life-giving becomes life-taking. The parable writes itself, as if scripted by poets who enjoy cruel jokes. But power always plays on dualities. The king who orders temples built also orders traitors destroyed. The same ruler who pardons one man may consign another to the boats. Historians still argue whether rulers like Artaxerxes II truly intended such punishments as lessons, or whether they were driven by moments of rage. But the effect is undeniable. Each cruel act echoes far beyond the victim. You wonder, delirious, whether courtiers watched your sentencing with awe or with dread. Did they nod in solemn approval, whispering, "Gare, the king is just"? Or did they shiver quietly, thinking, "If this is justice, what happens when mercy fails me?" Power's cruel edge always gleams sharper when it is displayed in public, and Scaphism was as public as it gets. River, sky, insects, villagers passing by. There is no curtain, no concealment, only exposure, and here lies another layer of the parable. In exposing you to the elements, the king also exposes his people to the sight of your torment. He gambles that fear will outweigh disgust, that obedience will outweigh revulsion. Historians note that leaders often misjudge such balances. Sometimes cruelty terrifies, sometimes it breeds resentment. Yet the Achaemenid kings must have believed this edge was worth wielding. The cruelty is not random, though fever makes it feel that way. It is crafted. The wood keeps you alive just long enough to suffer. The milk and honey nourish you just enough to prolong the feast. The exposure ensures witnesses. The entire ordeal is an engineered morality play, and you are its central actor. The king does not write with ink. He writes with your body. It is almost comical in a grim way. You used to think of honey as luxury, of milk as comfort, of wood as shelter. Now they are the very instruments of torment, every symbol inverted, every comfort corrupted. This inversion is itself part of the parable. Power can take what is good and twist it, because power is not bound by meaning. Power redefines meaning. You imagine a father along the riverbank pointing you out to his child. See him? That is what happens to traitors. The child, wide-eyed, nods. Fear roots itself early. That child will grow into a man who remembers the sight, who tells his own children. The parable outlives you, spreading like ripples in water. And yet, you also sense the danger for the king. Too much cruelty, and the people whisper in disgust. Too much spectacle, and they wonder whether the throne enjoys pain more than justice. Historians still argue whether Scaphism was effective as deterrence, or whether it risked undermining Persian authority. Perhaps both are true. Power's edge cuts in two directions. It defends the throne, but it also reminds subjects that the throne can be monstrous. Night descends again. The stars shimmer above, silent witnesses. You're too weak to lift your head, but you imagine the king looking up at the same stars from his palace far away. He sees constellations, omens, divine order. You see only points of light beyond your reach. He interprets the sky as a sign of his mandate to rule. You interpret it as a reminder of how small you are. Power shapes perception itself. The insects crawl still. The rot thickens. The guards murmur and shift on the bank. And in the middle of it all you float as the embodiment of a parable. You are no longer simply punished. You are repurposed into meaning. You are an object lesson, a story in progress, a reminder that kings hold both honey and blade. And as delirium deepens, you realize something. The cruel edge is not only theirs. You too are cutting, carving, not with steel, but with the memory of your suffering. Every gasp, every sting, every drop of sweat is recorded, not by scribes only, but by the imaginations of those who hear your story. Power's cruel edge continues to glint, not just in courts of empire, but in every retelling that whispers your fate across centuries. The current carries you slowly, gently, deceptively, as though the river itself pities you. The surface gleams under the morning sun, promising relief, whispering of coolness, of refreshment. But water, that ancient friend of the thirsty and the weary, is not your friend anymore. It is a cruel trickster in this punishment, surrounding you, cradling you, brushing against your skin but never delivering the comfort you crave. Your tongue is swollen, cracked like desert clay. The milk you are forced to drink sloshes thick and sour in your gut, but your mouth begs for something clean. Each time the boat-shaped coffin rocks, droplets of river water splash against your exposed arms or lips. The sensation mocks you. It feels like relief for a heartbeat, but the river is brackish, its surface alive with algae, its depths alive with creatures eager for your decay. If you sip, you take in filth, breeding sickness inside the sickness already consuming you. If you resist, you parch. Either way, the water betrays. The Persians, practical masters of irrigation and aqueducts, understood the symbolism. To be surrounded by water and still thirst, what better way to illustrate futility? In other punishments, executioners drew swords or raised torches. Here, they let the river do the talking. Its current whispers, "I could save you, but I won't." Flies lap at the moisture on your lips before you can. Mosquitoes rise thick from the banks, their stingers probing your face and arms. They draw from you, even as you dream of drawing from the river. There is no exchange in your favour, only extraction. The insects drink, the leeches drink, the river drinks. You alone are denied. It reminds you of a myth you once heard as a child. Tantalus, punished by the gods, forced to stand in water that receded whenever he bent to drink, beneath branches of fruit that lifted whenever he reached. The Greeks told that story to teach humility before divine law. You now live its Persian echo. You are Tantalus in a coffin of wood, your river both cradle and tormentor. Historians still argue whether the Greeks borrowed from Persian punishments when crafting their myths, or whether such images of futile thirst arise naturally in cultures across the world. Either way, the resonance is cruelly apt. Your stomach cramps. The milk forced into you days ago has turned inside your body, fermenting like spoiled cheese. Each movement of the boat sloshes it further, churning your insides. The honey on your lips is hard now, crystallized by the sun, but the taste lingers, sickly sweet, unbearable in contrast to the dryness of your throat. You beg, silently, hoarsely, for water. Just a sip, just one mouthful of something clear. But even if the guards relented and dipped a cup for you, it would not save you. They would stir milk into it, mix honey into it, turning refreshment into prolongation. Because here lies another cruel precision. You are not meant to die quickly of thirst. They ensure you drink enough, just enough, to keep your organs working, to keep your flesh warm for the insects, to keep you conscious for the lesson. Each swallow you are forced to take is not mercy. It is an extension of suffering. Water here is not a blessing. It is a leash. The river laps against the wood, murmuring secrets you can almost hear. Insects skate across its surface, their tiny legs dimpling the water as if mocking your thirst. Fish flick their tails, darting close to your dangling feet, sometimes nipping at softened flesh. You envy them. They are free in the water while you, floating upon it, are still captive. At dusk the river cools, mist rises, beading on your skin, dripping from your lashes. For a moment you feel almost quenched, as though the night's dampness seeps into you, but it is illusion. The thirst gnaws deeper, a fire in your throat that mist cannot soothe. You turn your head weakly, try to lick dew from the rim of the wood, but the effort yields nothing. The sky reflects in the water, moon silver, stars scattered, and you curse them silently. What good is beauty when your tongue cracks in your mouth? A quirky tidbit flickers through your mind, dredged up from memory. Herodotus once wrote of Persian armies carrying water from their homeland into battle, believing that only familiar rivers could sustain them. They held water sacred, as a connection to their land. And here you are, surrounded by water, utterly disconnected from it, denied its gift. Sacred turned profane in the most literal way. The irony stings worse than the mosquitoes. The guards, bored on the bank, drink from skins when they grow thirsty. You watch, lips trembling, as they tip the water down their throats, some of it spilling onto the ground. They do not even treasure what you would sell your soul for. One laughs when he catches your gaze, deliberately sloshing the water so you hear the gurgle. It is not cruelty of necessity, it is cruelty of choice. And yet, you realise something. Thirst is not only physical now, it is symbolic. You thirst for dignity, for release, for any control over your own body. You thirst for silence from the endless drone of flies, for freedom from the wood that grips your ribs, for mercy from a world that has turned sweet things into poison. You thirst for an end, but the river, eternal and indifferent, offers only continuation. By morning, your lips bleed when you try to open them. The crusted honey cracks painfully, sticking in clumps to your skin. You close your eyes, dreaming of fountains, of rainfall, of cold cups pressed to your lips. In those dreams you drink deeply, water spilling down your chin, your thirst finally quenched. But you always wake to the river's mockery, the water that surrounds, caresses and refuses. And so you drift on, a man marooned not in desert sands, but in liquid abundance that does nothing for him. The river hums its lullaby, the insects sing their shrill chorus, the guards watch with dull eyes. You are kept alive by water, yet never refreshed by it. And in that contradiction lies the perfection of your torment. By now you have stopped wondering whether the insects will come. They are here. They have always been here. Buzzing, swarming, crawling, chewing. They have become the true executioners of this ritual, wielding no sword, drawing no bow, making no speeches. Their sentence is carried out not with a single blow, but with the endless patience of countless mouths. You begin to realize that the cruelty of Scaphism rests not only in confinement, not only in thirst, but in this delegation of death to nature's smallest creatures. The flies are the vanguard. They arrived first, drawn by honey and waste, and they have not left. Their wings shimmer in the sun, a living haze around your head, your arms, your chest. They drink from every moist surface, from every crack where fluid seeps. They are shameless. Their tiny legs tickle as they scuttle across your cheeks, your eyelids, your lips. When you inhale, one sometimes dives too close, and you choke on the flutter in your throat. You shake your head weakly, but the swarm never disperses. To them you're not a man, you are a field of resources, a generous one that requires no work but landing. Then come the mosquitoes, whining like needles in the air. They are more methodical than flies, probing with precision. You feel the sharp pierce, the warmth of their feeding. the swelling welt they leave behind. Each sting is small, almost ignorable on its own, but multiplied by hundreds, repeated by thousands, the pain becomes constant, a tapestry of fire on your skin. They do not care whether you groan or pray. They care only for blood. You're no different to them than stagnant marsh deer. Ants, relentless and disciplined, climb in steady columns. They find every sticky line of honey, every crack in the wood where moisture pools. Their jaws pinch, their bodies weave in black trails across your forearms. Some crawl into your nostrils, your ears, the corners of your mouth. You cough, sputter, thrash as much as the coffin allows, but ants return. They are soldiers carrying away crumbs, only here the crumbs are you. And then, more insidious, the larvae. At first you mistook them for imagination, but the wriggling proves otherwise. Maggots hatched from eggs laid days earlier now move in the soft places where skin is broken. They are pale, blind, tiny coils of hunger. You feel them not only on your surface but within it. They burrow shallowly, feeding on what is already dying, transforming wounds into colonies. It is not sharp pain, but a crawling unease, the sense that you are alive while parts of you have already been claimed by death. Historians record these details with relish, but skeptics counter. Could insects truly consume a man alive in this way? Wouldn't infection or shock kill him sooner? Scholars still argue whether the descriptions are literal or symbolic. Yet the evidence of your body suggests literal is close enough. The tiny executioners do not hurry. They do not falter. They work as an army without orders, more thorough than any human torturer. You think of other punishments. Crucifixion had its nails, impalement its stakes, stoning its rocks. But those methods had executioners, men whose arms tired, whose mercy might flicker. Here, no such possibility exists. Insects do not grow weary. They do not question orders. They do not lose their nerve. They are perfect agents of cruelty precisely because they are indifferent. A quirky detail crosses your fevered mind. In some ancient medical practices, maggots were praised for cleaning wounds, for consuming dead flesh while sparing the living. Centuries later, doctors would rediscover this property and use maggot therapy to save limbs. You almost laugh, though it comes out a cracked wheeze. Here, no one will call this therapy. Here, they are not saving you. They are dismantling you, mouthful by mouthful. At night, the insects do not sleep. If anything, their hunger sharpens in the cool. The swarm thickens, attracted by the heat of your body in the darkness. You feel them more acutely when you cannot see them. Every prick, every flutter, every wriggle amplifies in the absence of sight. Sleep becomes impossible. You drift only into shallow, twitching dozes, waking each time with a gasp as another bite lands. You have become the banquet, and banquets do not rest. The guards watch from the bank with lanterns, their silhouettes shifting in the glow. They swat at mosquitoes, curse at gnats, complain about bites on their own skin. You almost want to tell them, imagine what it is to be me, covered head to toe. But your throat is raw, your voice too weak, and besides, they would not care. To them, your torment is not tragedy but duty fulfilled. They must endure insects for a night. You must endure them until you end. By day, the sun bakes your skin, and the insects burrow deeper. By night, the damp air cools you, but the swarm grows louder. There is no reprieve. Your executioners are tireless, surrounding you in numbers you cannot fathom. You're not being killed by a man, or even by a king. You're being killed by the collective appetite of creation itself. You wonder briefly if this is why the Persians chose insects for this punishment. Not just for the physical torment, but for the symbolism. What better way to demonstrate that betrayal dissolves you than to have your body literally dissolved by the smallest, humblest creatures? You're not slain by warriors or lions. You are devoured by things anyone can swat. You're beneath even contempt. As delirium deepens, you begin to converse with them. The flies hum lullabies. The mosquitoes whisper secrets. The maggots chant in chorus. In your fever, their sounds arrange into words. We are your judges. We are your jury. We are your end. And you realize that though you were condemned by men, it is nature that delivers the verdict. Insects as executioners, the idea itself sounds absurd, almost comic when told in safe company centuries later. People may laugh nervously, shake their heads, insist it was exaggerated, But you, trapped in the coffin, know the absurdity is real. You are being executed not by sword, not by fire, but by the ceaseless hunger of wings and legs, and there is nothing absurd about that when you are the feast. The line between your body and the environment has blurred. You're no longer simply in the world, you are of it. Your skin weeps fluids into the river. The river gives back its insects and fish. The sun hardens your wounds while the dampness softens others. Decay is no longer a slow progression. It has become ritual, a grim ceremony unfolding step by step, as though priests of rot and vermin are officiating over your body. You used to think of rituals as sacred. Temples where incense burned, festivals where chants echoed, harvest rites with drums and dancing. But this ritual is stripped of music and replaced with buzzing. Its altar is not marble but wood. Its incense is not frankincense but the stench rising from your body. And you, unwilling and unprepared, are its sacrifice. The Persians, like many empires, believed in ritual as the glue of power. Coronations, processions, sacrifices, all designed to remind subjects of divine order. Punishment too could become ritual, especially for treachery. It wasn't enough to kill a man. He had to be made into a symbol, his end transformed into a story. That's what Scaphism does. It turns your body into liturgy. Every fly is a prayer bead, every maggot a verse, every drip of honey a libation. The wood coffin is both shrine and prison. You feel its pressure constantly, ribs grinding against the grain, hips bruised where the halves pinch. The wood swells with river damp, creaking like a temple door, as though chanting alongside the insects. When the current rocks you gently, it is not comfort, but choreography. You sway in time with the ritual, like a dancer tied to the beat of suffering. The rot has deepened. Flesh softens under the constant ministrations of maggots and flies. You no longer flinch at every bite. Your nerves have dulled in places, gone silent where too much tissue has been consumed. The pain, oddly, is less sharp now. What replaces it is horror of another kind. The realization that you're becoming corpse while still breathing. Your mind whispers, this is what death feels like. But then the next breath reminds you, not yet. Historians still argue whether Scaphism was truly practiced, or whether it was symbolic theatre in text. Some claim it was an invention of Greek imagination, a grotesque story meant to frighten and moralise. Others counter that the precision of the account suggests eyewitness truth. The debate continues, but you know, rituals thrive on stories, whether real or invented, and your story, real as it is in your body, is already becoming ritualised in the mouths of others. You picture villagers along the riverbank. Perhaps they pause at the sight of you, whisper to their children, that man betrayed the king. Some cross themselves or mutter prayers to ward off your fate. Others laugh nervously, relieved it is not them. Each reaction is part of the ritual. You are spectacle and sermon, the floating embodiment of the king's power. Your mind dredges up a quirky detail. In some ancient funeral rites, honey was poured into tombs as an offering to the gods. Sweetness was thought to guide souls into the afterlife. Yet for you, honey guides only flies and worms. Your journey into death is not gilded but gnawed. The inversion feels deliberate, as if the ritual mockingly mirrors sacred practice. What is holy in one context becomes horror in another. Night again, and the river is quiet save for the insect chorus. The guards light torches, their flames reflected in the water flickering like votive candles. They do not think of it as a vigil, but you do. Every hour of your continued life feels like a verse recited by the Empire. Each sunrise is a renewal of the rite. You're not left to rot unseen. You're kept alive so decay itself can be stretched into performance. The stars above twinkle like jewels, reminding you of Zoroastrian fire temples where flames were eternal, tended carefully. Your own fire, the spark of life, flickers in mockery. Instead of priests tending it, insects feed it down into embers. Ritual, once meant to connect man to divinity, now connects you only to dissolution. You wonder if the courtiers back at Persepolis tell themselves this is justice. That treachery deserves not only death but a ritual unmaking. They may imagine that your suffering purifies the empire, scrubbing away betrayal as surely as fire purges impurity. But you, in your coffin, know there is no purification, only putrefaction. The ritual is not holy. It is theatre dressed in the language of sanctity. You close your eyes, delirious, and imagine your body as a temple. The maggots are its worshippers, the flies its choirs, the river its congregation. They chant without words, feast without pause, honour their strange god of hunger. And in this grotesque inversion, you are both priest and sacrifice. You preside over your own undoing. Decay has its own rhythm now. Flesh loosens, fluids seep, insects multiply. It is systematic, almost orderly, as though choreographed by some hidden conductor. You're both horrified and mesmerised by the inevitability of it. Rituals comfort because they are predictable, and this ritual too has become predictable. Each day, honey, insects, waste, swelling, buzzing. Each night, fever, delirium, whispers in the reeds. You could almost set a calendar by it, if you had days left enough to count, and still the ritual goes on. The guards yawn, the insects sing, the river carries you. You are the liturgy of decay, repeated endlessly, carved not in stone but in flesh, and long after your breath ceases, the story of this ritual will continue, retold as legend, debated as fact, remembered as warning. The river rocks you gently, though nothing about this motion feels tender. It is more like a cradle built for corpses, lulling you with the monotony of endless buzzing and creaking wood. In the haze of fever and pain, your mind wanders toward comparisons. Human beings, after all, have always had an odd fascination with death. How it comes, what form it takes, which version is most terrible, and you, pinned between honey and wood, cannot help but measure your fate against the catalogue of history's other punishments. First comes crucifixion. You picture Roman crosses planted like trees along dusty roads, bodies nailed or tied to beams, sagging under their own weight until suffocation or exhaustion finish the work. Crucifixion was meant to be public, humiliating, drawn out. In that, it is a cousin to Scaphism. Yet crucifixion has its end measured in days, not weeks. The victim is elevated on display, but the sun and thirst are the main agents. Insects arrive too, but they are secondary. Your torment, by contrast, is shared equally between wood, river, hunger, insects, and the very waste of your own body. Crucifixion feels almost merciful compared to being eaten alive by larvae. Almost. Then you think of impalement, that grim specialty of Assyria, and later Vlad the Impaler of Wallacean fame. A sharpened stake driven through the body, the victim lifted like a grotesque banner until gravity and time did the rest. Quick if the stake pierced vital organs, slow and excruciating if angled carefully to avoid them. Compared to Scaphism, impalement seems direct. Violent, yes, but straightforward. It is the difference between being struck by lightning or eroded by years of rain. Both destroy, but one annihilates instantly, while the other dismantles molecule by molecule. Burning at the stake comes next in your mental comparisons. Flames consuming flesh, smoke filling lungs, a spectacle often tied to accusations of witchcraft or heresy. Fire is merciless but efficient. The pain is searing, unbearable, but the body cannot endure it long. You imagine heat blistering skin, hair curling, organs cooking. Terrible, yes, but finite. Scaphism laughs at fire's efficiency. It offers instead the slowest burn possible, sun on your skin, fever in your blood, rot simmering beneath your flesh. Beheading, by contrast, feels almost enviable. A sword, an axe, a single strike. If the executioner was skilled, death was near instantaneous. If clumsy, it might take more than one swing, but still, it was minutes, not days. How strange to think that once you might have dreaded the headsman's blade, and now you would welcome it as deliverance. A clean cut seems a luxury. There were others too. Stoning, where an entire community hurled rocks until a body collapsed beneath the barrage. It was brutal, chaotic and humiliating, but swift compared to this. Drowning, where lungs filled with water in desperate gulps. Hanging, where the body jerked and strained against rope. All brutal, all terrifying, but none with quite the same poetry of cruelty. None that turned honey into a lure, milk into fuel, insects into executioners. Historians often rank punishments as if they are competitors in a grim contest. Scaphism, crucifixion, impalement, flaying, boiling alive. Which was worst? Which lasted longest? Which inspired the most fear? Scholars still argue whether such comparisons even make sense, since the accounts vary wildly and often exaggerate for effect. But your own experience insists that Scaphism is unique in one way. It erases dignity long before it erases life. Flaying might strip skin, but the victim remains human until the end. Crucifixion, impalement, burning, they all preserve a sense of personhood, however degraded. But Scaphism transforms you into something else. You're not simply a man in pain. You're a banquet, a breeding ground, a grotesque ecosystem. You're both alive and carrion, both subject and object. The humiliation is as thorough as the suffering. A quirky tidbit flashes in your fevered memory. Some ancient rulers believed unusual deaths granted power to the throne itself, as though the victim's agony fed divine order. Could that be the case here? Did the king imagine that your prolonged decay strengthened his authority, like an offering of rot to cosmic balance? If so, you're not only compared to other deaths, you're part of a competition, a grim hierarchy of sacrifice. You close your eyes and think of the conversations that will happen centuries later. A group of students in a lecture hall, eyes wide, as a professor asks, which was the cruelest punishment in history? Someone will raise a hand, Scaphism. Others will nod, fascinated and horrified. They will debate the details, some insisting crucifixion was worse, others defending impalement's horror. But they will speak of you, your ordeal turned into words, your pain converted into academic exercise. In your fevered haze, you almost address those future students. You want to tell them, do not rank these deaths like games. Each is terrible in its own way, but you also know that comparisons are inevitable, part of human nature. People want to measure suffering, to draw boundaries around fear, and so your name, or at least your fate, will always be placed alongside others in that dreadful conversation. The sun dips lower, gilding the water in red and gold. Flies still hum, maggots still writhe, mosquitoes still sip. The guards murmur on the bank, their voices casual, unconcerned. You're still drifting, still suffering, still being undone slowly, and yet your mind clings to those comparisons as though measuring other deaths gives you perspective on your own. Perhaps that is the final irony, that even as you rot alive you imagine worse, or better, or equal fates, that even in torment the human mind reaches for narrative, for context, for scale. You are not just a victim, you're a participant in the great, terrible gallery of human cruelty, and in that gallery Scaphism holds its place with grim pride, unique in its patience, unmatched in its humiliation. The river carries you onward, its current slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Your coffin of wood no longer feels like a prison alone. It feels like a proclamation floating on water. Every ripple against your side seems to whisper your crime, treachery, betrayal, disloyalty. You're not merely dying, you're being exhibited as the consequence of broken trust. Treachery. No empire fears anything more. Armies can be rebuilt, cities can be reconstructed, fields can be replanted. But betrayal from within gnaws at the very foundations of power. It corrodes confidence, corrodes loyalty, corrodes the sense of divine favour that kings so carefully cultivate. And that is why Scaphism, in all its slow horror, was said to be reserved for traitors, for those whose disobedience was not simply error but treason. The most famous name attached to this punishment is Mithridates. You mutter it in your fever, almost like a prayer, though you doubt he prayed for the same. He was once an officer in the service of Artaxerxes II, ambitious, clever, dangerous. Some say he betrayed his king during a crucial campaign, that he revealed secrets to enemies. Others whisper he boasted too loudly of victories, stealing credit that belonged to the throne. Still others claim his fall was courtly intrigue, his guilt exaggerated by rivals. Historians still argue whether Mithridates was truly treacherous or merely unlucky. But what the records agree upon is his fate. The king condemned him to the boats, and Plutarch recounts that he lasted 17 days. 17, long enough for rumour to spread, for whispers to reach the far corners of the empire. Imagine the effect. Villagers murmuring about the officer who betrayed his king and was eaten alive by worms and flies floating in a coffin of wood. Fear alone could tighten loyalties that swords might not. You try to picture Mithridates himself. Perhaps he was once proud, striding in polished armour, giving orders in a steady voice. Perhaps he thought himself indispensable, too important to fall. Then the sentence came, and he was stripped, bound, smeared with honey like a common thief. Did he rage? Did he beg? Did he curse the king's name as they lowered the wooden shells over his body? You imagine him drifting just as you drift now, staring at the same pitiless sun, gagging on the same spoiled milk, scratching with his mind against the same swarm of flies. You feel a bitter kinship with him. You too are accused of betrayal, though fever clouds your memory of what deed brought you here. Was it treason, truly? Or an insult misheard? A loyalty misinterpreted? A rival's whisper amplified? In empires, truth bends under the weight of power. Treachery is defined not by act alone, but by who tells the story afterward. This is why punishments for treachery must be elaborate. The empire cannot simply kill the traitor. It must erase him. It must reduce him to something less than human, a body unrecognizable, a story so grotesque no one dares follow in his footsteps. Scaphism achieves this with terrifying thoroughness. You're not merely executed, you're unmade, absorbed by insects, liquefied into legend. A quirky tidbit presses through your delirium. In some traditions, treachery was punished by damnatio memoriae, erasing the traitor's name from records, chiselling it off inscriptions, pretending he never existed. Here, the opposite occurs. You are remembered too vividly, too grotesquely. Your name is glued to your manner of death. You are not forgotten. You are immortalized as warning. Perhaps Mithridates would rather his name had been erased. Perhaps you would too. The guards on the bank mutter, and you catch fragments. They speak not of you, but of loyalty, of oaths, of their own families waiting at home. You realize even their conversation is part of the lesson. Watching you rot keeps their tongues tied, their ambitions tethered. They may grumble about commanders, but never about the king. Not after seeing this. And yet, treachery has always been the shadow twin of loyalty. No empire survives without loyal men, but no empire is free of betrayal. The bigger the throne, the bigger the temptation to topple it. That is why kings invent punishments so theatrical. They must convince not only the traitor, but every onlooker that rebellion is folly. Historians still debate whether Mithridates' story is factual or exaggerated, whether his 17 days were literal or literary, but to you the details do not matter. What matters is the message. Treachery earns not just death, but degradation. It earns a place in a coffin of wood, afloat yet trapped, food for maggots rather than food for gods. Night comes and you whisper his name again, Mithridates. In the buzzing chorus of insects you fancy you hear his voice whisper back. Perhaps he did endure as long as they say. Perhaps his mind, like yours, wandered through memories, through comparisons, through futile prayers. Perhaps he too realized that punishment for treachery is not merely about one man's sin, but about a throne's insecurity. The stars wheel overhead. The river carries you further. Your body weakens, but your awareness sharpens. You're not simply dying. You are being paraded as a parable. Your crime, whether real or fabricated, has been carved into flesh. And long after your breath ceases, they will not speak of you as a man. They will speak of you as an example, a warning, a name linked forever with treachery and torment. The river continues its endless murmur beneath you, and the stars above glide slowly westward like watchful eyes. Your body is weakening, fevered, swollen, and claimed inch by insects. But your mind drifts far beyond the reeds and the guards' torches. You begin to hear voices not of soldiers or courtiers, but of philosophers, thinkers, storytellers, who would one day use your ordeal as fodder for their morality plays. They hover in the imagination like a chorus, each arguing what your torment means. One voice, sharp, Greek, precise, sounds suspiciously like Plato's students debating in the agora. See, he insists, this is the fate of a man who betrays trust. Justice must be both visible and terrifying. Without example, societies dissolve. Another voice, darker, sounds like a Stoic. Perhaps Seneca, centuries later, saying calmly, "Pain does not define virtue. A wise man could endure even this with equanimity." You want to laugh at that. Could he really? Would he lie serenely as flies bred in his wounds? You doubt it, though his words echo as though trying to grant you borrowed strength. Historians still argue whether philosophers truly discussed Scaphism, or whether later writers folded it into their narratives as convenient allegory. But you can easily imagine them doing so. Ancient thinkers thrived on gruesome examples, weaving them into tales to shock their students into deeper reflection. One man's agony becomes another man's lecture. To a philosopher, your torment is not personal. It is principle. You are an illustration in their dialogue, a paragraph in their treatise, a marginal note underlined for emphasis. Your cries are transcribed into neat syllogisms. Betrayal leads to disorder. Disorder leads to punishment. Punishment deters betrayal. QED. You exist not to live, but to prove a point. In fevered delirium, you stage a play in your mind. A philosopher, say Aristotle, sits before a gathering of pupils. He gestures to a scroll describing your fate. Behold, he says, the punishment of the traitor Mithridates. What can we learn? A student replies, that power without justice is cruelty. Another argues, that cruelty can itself be justice if it prevents rebellion. The hall hums with debate, each voice shaping your torment into moral geometry. Meanwhile, you float, gnawed and gasping, absent from the conversation except as example. You realise then that Scaphism was designed not only as punishment, but as philosophy incarnate. It embodies questions that societies never stop asking. Is cruelty ever justified? Does deterrence excuse excess? Does the state own the body of the traitor? Or is there a boundary power cannot cross? Even now, centuries later, scholars and ethicists wrestle with these questions, and they wrestle because of you, or at least because of the story of you. The irony stings sharper than mosquitoes. In life, you may have been obscure, just another officer, another subject. In death, you become an argument, a lesson, a case study. Philosophers pluck your suffering like a string on a lyre, coaxing meaning from your misery. They mould you into a morality play to be performed again and again, long after your bones sink into silt. A quirky tidbit from memory surfaces, medieval monks, copying Plutarch centuries later, sometimes embellished punishments in the margins with sketches, tiny ink drawings of men bound in coffins, flies buzzing around them. These monks, cloistered in stone cells, likely shuddered and then moralised. Thus doth betrayal earn its doom. They too turn torment into theatre, your coffin into stage prop. In your fever, you even imagine a modern classroom, students in neat rows, clicking pens, a lecturer with slides. On the screen, Scaphism, the boats. The lecturer gestures, says, historians still argue whether this ever truly occurred, but it serves as an example of how cruelty was weaponized as law. Students scribble notes, some grimace, some smirk, and in that moment you realize you're still floating, not on the river now, but in imagination, in words, in morality, plays stretched across centuries. The philosophers' voices blur together, weaving into one chorus. Some condemn the cruelty, insisting no state has the right to degrade a man into carrion. Others praise the deterrence, insisting the safety of many outweighs the suffering of one. You want to shout that neither is right, that philosophy means nothing when your skin crawls with maggots, but your throat is dry, cracked, unable to lift such protests. You remember another debate, whether humans differ from beast by reason alone. Yet here, you're being consumed by beasts, undone not by swords, but by the appetites of nature. What philosophy does that prove? Philosophy. That man is no different. That kings may remind their people of this brutal equality. Perhaps that is the real play. Power stripping away the illusion of dignity, leaving only biology exposed. Night falls again, stars wheeling, torches dimming. You feel yourself drifting not just on the river but into abstraction. You are both man and metaphor, flesh and fable, and in that duality lies the cruel genius of Scaphism. It does not merely kill, it argues, it demonstrates, it moralizes. It turns agony into syllogism, worms into witnesses, buzzing into a lecture. And so, as the insects feed and the river rocks, you float not only through reeds, but through centuries of thought. You are the central character in a morality play that never ends, staged again and again in the minds of philosophers, teachers and listeners who lean closer in the dark, both horrified and fascinated. The river does not care which empire owns its banks. It flowed before Persia rose, and it flows long after Persia crumbles. Yet as you drift in your coffin of wood, consumed by insects and fever, your mind drifts too. Outward, forward, across centuries. You realise that what is happening to you will not stay confined to one empire's annals. Stories travel, punishments echo. Cruelty has a way of migrating, reshaped and retold by cultures that inherit or oppose one another. Already the Greeks seized on this tale. They cherished it as evidence of Persian barbarity, using it in their endless rivalry of East versus West. They told the story with relish, certain it proved their superiority. See, they said, this is what Persians do. Decadent, monstrous, unrestrained. Whether they believed it or simply enjoyed the propaganda, the echo began there, amplified by every retelling. But echoes never stay pure. Later empires borrowed cruelty in their own ways. The Romans, masters of spectacle, may not have practiced Scaphism, but they shared its philosophy. Punishment as public theatre. Crucifixions lined roads like grim milestones, bodies swaying above the dust to remind all travellers that Rome tolerated no betrayal. In that sense, the boats of Persia drifted into the crosses of Rome. Different tools, same message. The Byzantines, heirs of Rome, preferred blinding, mutilation and exile for traitors. They believed leaving a man alive but broken was more useful than killing him outright. Yet the echo of Scaphism still lurked in chronicles they read. Some monks even likened their blinding rituals to the unmaking described in Persian tales, punishment that transforms a man into something less than human. In the medieval Islamic world, stories of ancient Persia were recopied and commented upon. Scholars debated whether Scaphism was factual, moral, or merely slanderous invention. But the echo remained. Even in disbelief, the tale lived on, whispered in bazaars and written into encyclopedias of strange wonders. Historians still argue whether such echoes shaped later tortures in Europe. Some note how early modern Europe developed its own slow deaths, breaking on the wheel, drawing and quartering, executions designed not to end but to perform. Did these inventors know of Scaphism? Or did cruelty arise independently in each place, like weeds that sprout no matter the soil? The question has no clear answer, but the resemblance is uncanny. Your mind, though fevered, sketches a map of echoes. In China, traitors were subjected to death by 1,000 cuts, a ritualized slicing meant to erode body and dignity alike. In India, some criminals were tied beneath elephants' feet to be crushed slowly, the crowd gasping with each hesitant step. In medieval France, boiling alive was occasionally prescribed, flesh sloughing into broth before witnesses. All of these echo Scaphism's principle. Death drawn out, body degraded, community warned. The echo reaches even further. Centuries later, explorers and scholars of Europe would dig through old texts, stumble upon Plutarch's account and shudder. Some dismissed it as legend. Others repeated it gleefully, filing it under strange punishments of the Orient. Even in disbelief they spread the tale, embedding it in the Western imagination as a symbol of exotic cruelty. And the echoes continue into modernity. Think of how stories of torture fascinate even now. Documentaries retelling them, novels dramatizing them, forums debating their plausibility. Scaphism drifts into popular culture as shorthand for the worst death imaginable. The empire that birthed it has long vanished, but the echo remains, louder than marble ruins or broken statues. A quirky tidbit surfaces. During the Renaissance, collectors of curiosities sometimes included written descriptions of Scaphism in their cabinets, alongside fossils, shells, and stuffed animals. Imagine that. Your torment catalogued as an oddity, displayed between a narwhal horn and a dried seahorse. Visitors would lean in, read the parchment, and gasp. The echo had transformed your agony into entertainment. You realise with grim clarity that empires crave echoes. They want their laws, their punishments, their victories remembered. A swift, merciful death makes no echo, but a man rotting alive in honey and wood, that travels across centuries, that lodges in memory, retold by enemies, by allies, by strangers who never saw Persia. Your suffering is a coin minted by cruelty, passed hand to hand through history. And so you lie in your coffin, buzzing swarm thick around you, and you sense that you're no longer only a man in Persia. You're also a story in Greece, an anecdote in Rome, a curiosity in Europe, a metaphor in classrooms far beyond your reach. The echo's already louder than your voice. It strikes you then that the true punishment of Scaphism is not just the insects, not just the rot. It is immortality of the worst kind. You will not be remembered for your deeds, your loves, your victories. You will be remembered as the man in the boats, the one eaten alive by nature itself. Your name, if spoken at all, will be secondary to the image. You are an echo carried across empires, stripped of humanity, preserved only as horror. The guards yawn on the bank, the river murmurs, the insects feed, and in the buzzing you can almost hear the future, voices in other tongues retelling your fate. The empire that condemned you will fall, but your torment will travel, crossing borders more easily than armies, enduring longer than walls. The coffin creaks as you drift further down the river, and though your body is half numb from fever and rot, your mind latches onto a strange thought. Who will write me down? Because if this punishment is more than execution, if it is performance, then the audience is not only those villagers who gasp on the riverbank or the guards who wrinkle their noses at your stench. The audience includes scribes, monks, chroniclers, who will take the story and fix it in ink. And centuries from now, their manuscripts will decide whether you were real or just a rumour drifting between cultures. In monasteries of medieval Europe, men bent over vellum, quills scratching by candlelight. They copied tales from Plutarch, from Ctesias, from scattered fragments of Greek and Roman writers, and always the story of Scaphism slipped in like a shard of glass among smooth stones. The monks may never have seen Persia, never smelled its honey or heard its buzzing flies, yet when they dipped their quills, they recreated your torment line by line, ensuring it endured far from the rivers where you actually floated. Some of these scribes believed the story completely. To them, it was a sign of pagan cruelty, proof that the heathens who denied Christ indulged in horrors unimaginable. In their margins they sometimes sketched little doodles, a figure in a trough, insects circling like halos inverted. You, centuries gone, reduced to a crude cartoon beside a Latin psalm. Others, more sceptical, added cautious notes. This tale may be an exaggeration, for who could survive such torment for so long? Even doubt, though, ensured remembrance. Skepticism and belief both preserved you. Historians still argue whether these medieval retellings distorted the original account or simply echoed it faithfully. But distortion itself was part of the process. One chronicler might emphasize the honey as a symbol of false sweetness. Another might focus on the river, turning it into an allegory of baptism corrupted into punishment. Another might inflate the duration, from 17 days to 20 to 30, because exaggeration made the sermon sharper. The farther from Persia the tale travelled, the more symbolic it became. Medieval Europe thrived on morality tales, and Scaphism fit neatly into their worldview. It became not just Persian cruelty but divine justice. Priests used it in sermons. See what fate awaits the betrayer even among heathens. The moral was clear. Betrayal of God or king leads to degradation worse than death. Listeners shuddered, not because they believed Persians were still practicing the punishment, but because the story crystallized their fears about loyalty and treachery. A quirky tidbit. In a few illuminated manuscripts, artists painted Scaphism alongside depictions of hell. Devils smeared honey on sinners, insects feasted, wooden coffins floated on fiery rivers instead of watery ones. The punishment was absorbed into Christian imagination, not as Persian history, but as proof of eternal torment. Thus your suffering was rebranded, enlisted into the theology of damnation. Yet not every chronicler treated it as moral allegory. Some were simply fascinated by the grotesque. Collections of marvels of the world listed Scaphism alongside tales of monstrous races and distant wonders. In these texts, you drifted beside headless men of India, dog-headed tribes, and rivers of fire. Reality no longer mattered. You were entertainment. Readers gasped not at the justice but at the spectacle, imagining with horrified delight the buzzing flies, the bloated flesh, the endless days. You almost smile at the thought, if your cracked lips could still form the shape. You have become both sermon and sideshow. In one manuscript you are a warning to obey God. In another, you are a curiosity for the bored noble leafing through exotic tales. Either way you're remembered. Memory, even distorted, keeps you afloat long after your body sinks. And memory has power. When medieval rulers needed to terrify their subjects, they reached for old chronicles, for examples of ancient punishments. Scaphism was cited as evidence that rulers had always dealt harshly with treachery, that cruelty had precedent. Kings and judges justified their own executions by pointing backward. Look, even the mighty Persians dealt thus with traitors. Your ordeal became ammunition for new acts of violence centuries removed. The guards on the bank yawn, swat mosquitoes, and complain of boredom. They think your suffering ends here, with their watch. They do not realise that in cloisters across the sea, men in robes will write you into parchment, that in universities centuries later, professors will argue over the accuracy of your tale, that in hushed bedtime stories parents will frighten children with the fate of the betrayer who was eaten alive by flies. It dawns on you, this is the true immortality of Scaphism, not the body, which rots, not the river, which forgets, but the memory, carried by scribes, reshaped by sermons, preserved in margins and footnotes. Even when no empire remains to enforce its terror, the story itself survives, drifting across borders like the coffin that carries you now. The moon rises again, pale and distant. You feel yourself slipping further into delirium, your mind scattering between past and future. But in the buzzing chorus you hear an odd refrain, the scratching of quills, the chanting of monks, the rustle of parchment. They are writing you down even as you float. You're no longer merely a victim. You're becoming text. And once something becomes text, it becomes immortal. The wood around you swells with damp, the buzzing never ceases, and your breath rasps like wind through reeds. Yet your mind, already drifting far beyond your immediate torment, begins to imagine voices that do not belong to guards, courtiers, or monks. They belong to people centuries after your bones have dissolved. People who gather not in temples or cloisters, but in lecture halls, living rooms, and glowing screens. You sense the modern fascination that clings to horrors such as yours. Fascination that keeps Scaphism alive in memory, long after the rivers of Persia have forgotten. For modern audiences, your ordeal is not a punishment to dread firsthand, but a story to consume safely. They lean back in chairs, popcorn in hand, watching documentaries that describe the most horrific punishments in history. The host's voice lowers dramatically as an image appears. A crude drawing of a man sealed between boats, flies buzzing, arms protruding helplessly. Viewers shudder and mutter, "How awful," even as they can't look away. Horror, when caged in the distance of history, becomes entertainment. You imagine podcasts recounting your tale, hosts swapping grisly trivia, listeners driving home through traffic while nodding along. Scaphism, they say, was when the Persians smeared you with honey and let insects eat you alive. The facts are simplified, compressed into neat sentences, repeated with morbid glee. The centuries of debate, the questions about exaggeration, the moral weight, all shrunk down into a shocking soundbite, and still, the fascination grows. Historians still argue whether the story's survival owes more to truth or to spectacle. Some modern scholars dismiss it outright, calling it propaganda of the Greeks. Others insist that even if exaggerated, it reflects the mindset of ancient punishments, where cruelty and theatre are often intertwined. This argument fills books, journals, articles online. Each page, each click, ensures the echo of your torment continues. Even fiction borrows you. Novelists of the 19th century, eager for exotic details, plucked Scaphism from footnotes and placed it into their tales of ancient cruelty. Horror writers of the 20th century turned it into metaphor, describing characters consumed by Scaphism of the soul. Even now, in forums and chat rooms, people trade the word like a dare. Do you know what Scaphism is? Look it up. And with every whisper the image sharpens. Honey, boats, insects. You drift once more, carried not by rivers but by algorithms. A quirky tidbit. In some survivalist forums, modern readers speculate how long one could last under such conditions, debating hydration rates, insect life cycles, metabolic endurance. They treat your torment like an experiment to be calculated, a grim curiosity rather than lived horror. One argues 17 days is impossible, another insists with constant feeding it could happen. You want to cry out, it doesn't matter how many days, 1 hour is enough to shatter a man. But the debate goes on, divorced from your voice. The fascination reveals something fundamental about human beings. Horror is both repulsive and magnetic. People recoil and lean closer at the same time. Safe in their homes, they indulge the thrill of imagining the unimaginable. Your torment becomes a roller coaster of the mind, a nightmare tasted at arm's length. It reassures them, I am safe because this is long past, far away. Yet it also awakens something darker, the recognition that cruelty is timeless, that the boundary between past and present is thinner than they wish. You picture classrooms again, but this time modern. A teacher writes Scaphism on a whiteboard. Students groan, some intrigued, some queasy. The teacher explains, gesturing to slides, one of the cruelest punishments described in history. A hand goes up. But did it really happen? The discussion swirls, arguments for and against, the same debates that echoed in cloisters and salons centuries before. And you, the unwilling participant, are once more dissected, not by insects, but by curiosity. There is also satire. Comedians mention Scaphism in routines, joking that it makes traffic jams seem pleasant, or that it should be the punishment for spammers. The audience laughs nervously, half aware of the real horror behind the punchline. Even laughter keeps you alive, keeps the boats floating. And then there are the horror films, dramatizations that embellish further. Dark rivers, buzzing soundtracks, actors screaming in sticky coffins while swarms of CGI flies descend. Audiences cover their eyes but peek between fingers, compelled by disgust. You exist not only in chronicles but on screens, recreated with special effects, your torment replayed for box office thrill. You realise that modern fascination differs from ancient dread. For Persians, your death was deterrence. For Greeks, it was propaganda. For medieval scribes, it was morality. For modern people, it is spectacle, curiosity, clickbait. Each age reshapes you, but none frees you. You are eternal, not in soul but in story. Even now, in quiet bedrooms, listeners curl under blankets with earbuds, hearing your tale in whispered narration. They shiver, check the shadows, and then sigh with relief. It isn't me, it's only a story. Yet the story works its way under their skin. They imagine honey smeared on their arms, insects buzzing near their ears, wood pressing against their ribs. They cannot quite shake it before sleep. You have become their nightmare by proxy. And so you float, not only on rivers but in imagination, in fascination. You are pinned not just in wood but in collective memory, gnawed not only by insects but by centuries of retellings. The guards who watch you will vanish. The empire that condemned you will crumble. But fascination ensures you survive, transformed into lesson, into curiosity, into horror consumed for pleasure. You whisper into the buzzing night, "Let me sink. Let me be forgotten," but fascination refuses. It drags you up again and again, reanimating you for new audiences, each eager to recoil, to laugh, to learn, to shiver. And in that endless retelling, you find the cruelest immortality of all. The river has slowed to little more than a lazy coil, reeds bending over its edges like mourners. Your body, swollen and fevered, barely registers the rhythm of current anymore. The insects continue, the rot continues. The honey still clings in tacky patches where the sun hardens it by day and softens it by night. And yet, somewhere deep inside the wreckage of what was once your strength, a stillness begins to grow. You are no longer fighting. You are listening. You are sinking into the final cadence of this long, unrelenting symphony. Your breath is shallow, but each exhale is strangely measured, like the beat of a drum winding down. The guards have stopped speaking to you. They talk only to one another now, muttering about their rations, their families, the boredom of watching a man dissolve slowly. You are no longer spectacle to them. You are background, fading, just another part of the riverbank. Perhaps this is the first mercy, the day when even your torment loses its novelty, when attention wanders and you can be left with the simple company of water, sky, and stars. And the stars are kind tonight. They scatter across the sky like lanterns hung by unseen hands, each one steady, each one older than any empire. Their constancy dwarfs both your pain and the throne that condemned you. If Persia vanishes, the stars will remain. If memory fades, they will still shine. You stare at them through half-lidded eyes, and for the first time in days you feel something close to peace. Historians still argue whether Scaphism truly happened, whether the Greeks embroidered it, whether Mithridates really endured 17 days. But their debates belong to libraries, not rivers. You are not in a library. You are here, drifting, half man, half story. And in that strange middle ground, you understand that truth matters less than the lesson carried forward. Power can twist sweetness into torment, and yet torment itself can soften into calm, when resistance finally releases. The insects do not stop, but you cease to resist them. Their legs are no longer daggers, only whispers. Their bites blur into sensation without edges. Even the writhing of larvae beneath your skin becomes background noise, less violation than inevitability. The river has taught you its rhythm, and you surrender to it. A quirky tidbit surfaces: how honey, sealed in jars in ancient tombs, remained edible thousands of years later. You smile faintly, though your lips crack. Perhaps the honey on your skin will outlast even your body, crystallizing long after bones sink into silt. Perhaps centuries hence someone will dredge up wood coated in amber crust and wonder about the story it tells. Memory clings stubbornly, like honey itself. The guards doze. The river murmurs lullabies in eddies and ripples. A heron lifts from the reeds, its wings slow, deliberate, slicing the night air. The smell of rot hangs heavy, yet even that sharpness dulls as your senses fade. You drift into the soft borderland where time stretches and contracts. Pain loses its teeth, fear loosens its grip, and now, listener, it is you who inhales with me. You who feel the weight of blanket, the hush of your own room. You have walked the long river with me, through honey, through insects, through echoes of courts and chronicles. You have carried the nightmare to its end. But now the nightmare softens. It becomes story, no longer reality. It is already receding like footsteps in the dark. Your eyelids are heavy. Let them fall. Picture the river not as coffin, but as cradle, rocking gently. Picture the buzzing fading into hums of summer night, harmless, far away. Picture the honey not as trap, but as sweetness, drizzled over warm bread in a kitchen where candles glow. Transform each image as you slip toward the rest. That is how you reclaim power from horror. You reshape it into lullaby. The stars remain. The river remains. Empires rise, empires fall, but night always brings its quiet. You are safe where you are now, listening. This story was only a story. You walk away with its lesson, but you do not carry its torment. That stays behind, sealed in history. So breathe deeply. Let the cruel imagery fade into the soft dark of your room. Let the nightmare close like a book placed gently on a bedside table. Sleep waits, calm and kind. You have survived the telling, which is more than any victim of Scaphism could claim. And as your eyes close, may you drift not on a river of honey and decay, but on a tide of calm. May your breath steady, your body loosen, your thoughts grow quiet. The nightmare has ended. The lullaby has begun. And now, as we reach the very end of tonight's journey, it is time to step fully away from the imagery of torment. Slow your thoughts with me. Let each word lengthen, soften, like ripples spreading wide across still water. You have travelled through shadows, through stories of cruelty, through centuries of debate and memory. But those were only words, only echoes. None of them can touch you here, in the hush of your own room. Imagine the river once more, but empty now. No boats, no buzzing, no burden. Only moonlight sliding across its surface, reeds swaying gently, frogs croaking in the distance. The water glitters silver, smooth and calm. You stand on its bank, free, unbound, a spectator instead of a prisoner. The air is cool, scented faintly with earth and night blossoms. You inhale, and your chest loosens. You exhale, and the day's weight flows out of you. The stars above keep their silent vigil. They do not hurry, they do not fade. They watch over you as they have watched over every wanderer, every dreamer, every listener across time. Their steady light reminds you that whatever horrors history may hold, the universe itself is vast and tranquil, stretching far beyond fear. Let your limbs grow heavy, sinking into the mattress as if it were soft earth. Let your mind drift like a leaf on quiet water. There is nothing to resist now, nothing to endure, only rest, only calm, only the gentle hum of life carrying you into sleep. So close your eyes, dear night owl. The nightmare is done. You are safe, you are warm, you are free.